I wish that you would speak to me. Then she remembered her camera. The ROV's video wasn't working, of course, with the power down, but she had an underwater camera that was purely mechanical. She could take a picture. She could show the others that these creatures were nothing to fear. She fumbled with the settings. Hurry, hurry, it's leaving. And as the glider sank down into the canyon, she finally got set for a picture. But just as she was ready to click the shutter, the small porter darted past her from behind, startling her. She completely missed the shot of the glider. Well, at least she could take a picture of this one, though it refused to hold still. Zigzagging down the canyon, she got one shot, only a second, before it disappeared. It was only partly a success. They had spoken to Lindsay, and she understood. The problem was that she didn't know they had spoken, because they communicated by directly manipulating memory and emotion at a chemical and electrical level. The builder's messages entered Lindsay's brain exactly the way her own thoughts and feelings did. So she thought their messages were her own ideas. She trusted them, believed them, but thought it was intuition, deduction, something inside herself. Humans aren't used to receiving others' thoughts directly, the builders told each other. They can't taste the flavor that tells us when a thought comes from someone else. So how can they possibly recognize someone else's mental voice inside their heads? Worse, how can they distinguish between their own thoughts and those we give them? We told her to be at peace. We told her where we come from, who we are, and what we do. But she decided for herself that our works were beautiful, and that she wanted us to teach her. Yet, if she knew that some of her thoughts came from us, she'd be unable to tell where our messages left off and her own desires began. And they discovered other things about her too. They could take away her fear, but that wasn't the only barrier between one human being and another. From her memories, they could see the countless times in her life when she had separated herself from other people, not from fear, but because of her intense concentration on the things she cared about. Human beings were capable of deliberately not knowing each other, shutting others off and cutting them off, and she didn't see this as a tragic loss, a bitter loneliness. She saw it as a necessity, the only way to concentrate on her work, to accomplish anything. So it won't be enough for us to remove fear, even if we could do that in the open air, where these humans live. Then there's no hope of changing them. We might as well begin our preparations to leave and let them destroy each other. It isn't our fault. They would have done it eventually, since they refuse to belong to each other. No. We can't dismiss them all so easily. We've still seen only a few of them. Unlike us, their utterly separate memories mean that each person is different from others. Knowing one, or even 100, doesn't mean we know them all. We have time. We can watch. We can see what they do, see if there's some hope for them. But we'll surely be disappointed. Alone now in the sonar shack, Sonny the human slept on. If he really believed there was something out there, he might have stayed awake, might have kept watch, but he was a skeptic, and so he slept. He didn't hear the interference that came up on the passive sonar. He didn't see the almost imperceptible trace that appeared on the active sonar screen. It arose out of the chasm, a single tube of water, within water. Usually, sonar completely missed the builders and the porters because they made no sound, and when sonar transmitted high-frequency sound waves, their bodies absorbed the energy of the sound vibrations within the water, reflecting nothing back for sonar to pick up. Now, though they were trying something new, instead of trying to reach the humans in the water, they would reach inside deep core itself and observe them, communicate with them if that was possible. It meant developing a new structure that could thrive in a gas environment instead of liquid. It meant reshaping and merging several porters into a flexible tube like a single thick tendril. Within this tube, builders could pass freely. They had to collapse their own bodies in order to fit, just as they did when traveling inside a glider. This was dangerous. They had none of their natural protection against the relatively low pressure, this close to the surface. That's why the builders sent out the tube from a glider far down the cliff, so they never have to venture out into the open water. The tube would protect them, allow them to carry the ocean with them inside the gaseous interior of deep core. They could see the humans as the humans saw each other. Because the new tube had a much thicker outer layer, the builders couldn't draw energy of any kind through it. Sound waves were no longer absorbed. The tube's movement could now be picked up faintly by deep core's active sonar. It also meant that as the tube rose up out of the cannon, there was no dimming of the lights inside deep core. The builders knew from Lindsay's mind that there was no energy to spare, and little oxygen. The risk of more human death was a serious matter to them now that they knew how permanent and complete human death was. They would do nothing to increase the risk. Besides, the dimming of power made the humans more fearful. By coming this way into the gaseous human environment, without any harmful act like the draining of power, surely the humans would not be afraid of them. Then they could begin to converse. In the sub-bay, Hippie had just finished the modifications to Big Geek, the underwater camera. He looked at the front of the ROV, its front bubble window like a single eye, the shark's smile painted under it. "All set, big guy," he said. Then sternly, "I told you to wipe that grin off your face." Hippie yawned, turned off the lights, and left the sub-bay. But behind him, the builder's probe reached up out of the water into the air. The tetramix that the humans breathed, the structure solidified, flexed, held. The brightness of the life inside the tube reflected from the water, making shadows dance on the ceiling and the walls. Swiftly, steadily, it followed Hippie out of the sub-bay, the tube growing at the tip, water and energy flowing along its length to provide the materials for its growth, drawing them ultimately from the sea below in the abyss. It was the first time the builders had ever had to make a structure that could move flexibly over solid surfaces while being fully self-contained in fluids and energy. The gliders had to fly through open atmosphere and the wide emptiness of space. They didn't have to move through narrow corridors, so their rigid skeletized structure wouldn't do at all. Fortunately, the atmosphere inside deep core was pressurized to balance with the ambient ocean, so the probe didn't have to withstand a serious pressure differential. All the strength of the structure was spent on holding it balanced in the air, not touching anything unnecessarily, since each friction point would require much greater energy and attention to support the walls of the tube. It worked splendidly. It rose out of the water, balancing precisely as it turned and extended over the sub-bay deck. Then thrust its swiftly growing tip through the hatch and into the corridors of deep core. They had built something new and it worked. Even if nothing else came of it, this would be worth sharing with other builder colonies on other worlds. But something else must come of this. They were so close to being able to make themselves understood. If the humans could hold off just a little longer, the builders could explain it all to them, so they wouldn't kill each other over offenses that no one meant to commit. Hippie trudged along the dark corridor. He reached the men's head and went inside. Behind him, light shimmered on the walls and doors. The lead builder took the tip of the probe past the door and went on toward the chambers where the builders outside Deep Core told her the most humans were gathered. Another builder stayed behind in the tube and sent tendrils through the door into the bathroom and began scanning Hippie's brain as he sat there. The probe reached into the room where Monk lay sleeping. The builder nearest the tip of the probe sent out tendrils to examine him. He was in pain, but the damage to his leg was structural only, and the body was healing itself. The builder didn't understand human body structure well enough to meddle. She went on. The probe found Jammer next. Here the builder's tendrils brought her more disturbing information. Jammer's oxygen poisoning had caused serious brain damage. Many of the connections within it had broken down when he saw the first builder, drastically changed from the condition it had been in when one of the builders scanned his brain back in the Montana. She passed the information back to the builder that was next behind her in the tube. Immediately, the second builder set to work, reconstructing the brain to the state it had been in when it was scanned before. She wasn't carrying all those memories with her, but it took only a few moments for the question to be passed down the tube to the glider waiting under the edge of the cliff. The questions were relayed by messenger to the city. Moments later, a builder returned with the full and perfect memory of exactly how Jammer's brain had been before the accident. The second builder sent out her own tendrils and began the work of reconstruction. Because it was delicate work, requiring much intelligence on the spot, she passed a significant portion of herself along the tendrils so that for a brief time she dwelt inside Jammer's head, overseeing the work where she could make instant decisions on a dozen subjects at once. In the meantime, the leader pressed on, trusting that the work of undoing the harm they caused would be carried on behind her. The tip of the probe reached into the mess hall, where Bud, One Night, and Catfish were asleep on tables, and Lindsay dozed lightly on a chair. The builder recognized her from her smell. The tiny flecks of skin that every human sheds, floating in the air, each fleck containing countless molecules that tagged her identity perfectly. Immediately, the builder thrust out tendrils to Lindsay and to all the others sleeping in the room. Because they had to stretch across such a long area of gas without the support of water, the tendrils were thicker than before, dozens of molecules across, but to human eyes, they remained completely invisible. They entered all the sleepers through the nostrils, the ears, the eyes, and quickly scanned their brains. It was a habit now, though only a short time before they were exploring the human brain for the first time. Within moments, memories were being transferred back down the tube to the builders waiting high in the cannon, and they, in turn, carried them to the city deep in the abyss. At once, the city began to analyze. Soon they would learn what had been happening in Deep Core from several different perspectives, but not soon enough. Lindsay stirred. The others felt nothing and remained asleep, but Lindsay had been touched before, and felt the surge of new thought within her mind, not as a dream, but as an event. She opened her eyes and saw it at once, a glassy tube of water suspended in the air, reaching through the door into the room. "Bud," she whispered, afraid to alarm it, but determined that this time she would not be the only witness. Bud, get up." He began to awaken. She felt a terrible dread that he would look and see nothing, that she really was going mad.
Then his eyes widened, his body stiffened, and he rose up from the bed like a wakening lizard. Yes, he saw it too. One Night heard the whispering, felt the movement, woke up, and when she saw the tube, she reflectively tried to back away. There was nowhere to go. Bud also heard movement from the gallery, where Monk must also be awake, and that left only Catfish asleep. "Cat!" he said. He threw a pillow at him. "Cat!" Catfish woke up surely, wanting to go back to sleep. He tossed away the pillow, drew his cap down over his eyes, and then he realized what he had glimpsed through squinting, sleepy eyes. He jumped up, grabbed the first heavy object that came to hand, a potted plant sitting in the window well. He held it up like a weapon. He was ready to do battle. The builder that led the probe felt the fear in them, but this time did not remove it. The city had decided that a little fear was so natural to humans that to deprive them of it completely would deform them. The only message that she sent directly to their brains was a feeling of hesitancy, a desire to wait and watch. Since this desire was already present in them, it was a matter of reinforcing what was already there. Only Lindsay watched with no fear at all, so the builder decided to begin her attempt at open communication with her. Since humans did not understand that they were being spoken to when thoughts were put directly into their minds, they had to try another way. Language was still too strange and difficult for them to attempt it with confidence, but since they could sense light themselves, they thought a visual message might work. So the probe twisted and darted forward until it hovered in the air in front of Lindsay's face. This startled her, and now she was afraid. For a moment, "Bud," she said, but then the probe hesitated in the air, its tip a foot or two from her. "No, it's okay. It's okay," she said. She touched him with a restraining hand. He obeyed her because he trusted her completely now. She was the one who had been proved right. If she said it was okay, then it was. "I think it likes you," he said. The builder felt Bud's anxiety ease along with Lindsay's. They were surprised at this. All she had done was touch him and say a few words, and yet his brain filled with calm, as if she had put the thought directly in his head. This was a surprise. They hadn't thought humans capable of such a thing. How was it done? With no physical connection, brain to brain? No time to explore that. Let the city do it as the memories reached them. The builder began the task assigned. Carefully, it formed the growing tip of the probe into a mirror image of Lindsay's face. Not perfect. The folds and creases were softened because of the material the probe was made of. Water. And the hairs were not even attempted. But it was her face, unmistakably. The builder scanned her thoughts to see what she made of it. "My face," she thought, which means they know me, or want to know me. They want me to see myself as they see me. Or maybe they want to see me as through my eyes, to understand how things look to me. She smiled. It smiled back at her. They want to wear my face, to be me. It's trying to communicate, she said. And as she did, the builder filled her mind with certainty. Yes, that's right. But it was easier with her, because she had already received so much communication from the builders. Now for the man beside her, the one who figured so powerfully in her recent memories. Bud saw his own face take shape on the tip of the NTI probe. And Lindsay laughed. "It's wonderful," she said. He couldn't help being delighted. Catfish and One Night were even laughing. nervously, but laughing. "It's me," Bud said. Fearless again, Lindsay remembered touching the large one that came so near to her before, so she reached out a hand to touch the probe. "No, no, no," Bud warned her. "It's okay," she said. "Trust me, it's okay." He trusted her. She reached out, pressed a finger against the probe. It was cool, but not cold, and it yielded as easily as if she had put her fingers into a basin of water. Not at all like the hard but frictionless surface of the big one outside. She brought her finger back to her mouth, tasted it. "Seawater," she said. But the builder was disappointed. These humans had no visual language beyond a few vague concepts. It was all speech. Even their writing was a visualization of speech. They would have to find another way. Nevertheless, there still should be some communication, so the builder quickly surveyed the immediate questions in their minds and reordered their minds to hold the answers they wanted. Then she backed away, withdrawing from the room. On the way out, she passed near Monk, reached out her tendrils into his mind. She sensed at once that he was different, that he knew things the rest of them didn't know. He knew how to kill, for one thing, and he had done it. But he was complicated, surprising. He took no pride from this, no pleasure. Monk the seal also knew about the warhead that had been brought aboard Deep Core, and even though she detected in him no will to use it, she learned from him that the warhead had been armed. Far from trying to dismantle their weapons, the humans were preparing them for use. She ordered the probe to rush down the corridor to the place where Monk's mind had told her the warhead was hidden. The city had to know what was being done with the warhead, what they meant to use it for, and how it worked. With Bud and Lindsay, Catfish and One Night running after her, she pushed the probe down the ladderway to the maintenance room where the warhead was kept. Her tendrils examined the weapon. It was still alive. The machinery was set up so it could explode. Why were the humans preparing to do this? If the builders could understand this one thing, then perhaps they could unlock the key to all the madness they had seen. Perhaps they could comprehend humanity and find a way to survive on the same planet with them. She probed again into the minds of the people watching her, but none of them knew. In fact, they were afraid of the weapon themselves. They loathed it, almost as much as the builders did. Even Monk had felt that way. Then, why did they tolerate it? Fear of coffee? Yes. A sense of duty and responsibility to their nation. Awe of the power of the thing. Reluctance to take the responsibility of acting against it themselves. In Lindsay's mind, a memory of being held by Shownick, pinned, unable to move, as terrible to her as being suffocated. Many reasons in many combinations. And as the builder held the tube near the warhead, she could also feel their fear. They were terrified that she might set off the weapon, or that she'd be angry at them for having it, that she'd retaliate. There was also hope in some of their minds, hope that she'd disarm it, that she'd take it away from them. These humans, they don't even trust themselves. In the city at the bottom of the Cayman Trench, the builders were at the border of despair. They had put themselves at risk to meet the humans in their atmosphere. They had tried to show their desire to communicate. What was the result? A doorway closed across the probe with no warning. They had come to help the humans save themselves from their own murderous instincts, and in response, the humans had tried to murder the messengers in fear. They knew that the human who tried to kill them was not the same as Lindsay and Bud and the others. The builders also knew that most of the crew was afraid of the seals, especially Coffee. But who decided to put the weapons into the hands of these men? Just because they delegated their killing to specialists didn't mean that the gentler humans weren't responsible. The humans, as a species, weren't even trying to curb their desire to kill. No, they are trying. They're afraid that if one side gives up their weapons, then the side that doesn't will rule them all. A vicious quandary, one that can't be resolved, for the very good reason that if one side disarmed, the other certainly would take advantage of it, or some third party would. We've seen their television. They're no different up in the atmosphere than these that have come down nearer to us. Therefore, we should leave and let them destroy each other. That will sweep away the problem well enough. We can't give up. Part of this is our fault. Even inside Deep Core, it's partly the fear of what he thinks we are that has made this Coffee so afraid. What more can we do? We can't safely go inside again. When we speak to them, they don't know we're speaking. We could force them to think the thoughts we want them to have, but what would that accomplish? That isn't communication, it's slavery. Let them be. We can still watch them, can't we? Watch them. See them act out the murder and destruction that has filled their history. In the bubble of air inside Hatch 6, Catfish knew that he should head back for the hatch he had come from. The longer he waited, the colder he'd get here in this water. Yet he couldn't stand the thought of giving up, leaving it all up to Bud. If Bud made it, he'd have to come out of the water and face Coffee. Bud wasn't up to it. He didn't have the fighting skills. Catfish did. They made fun of him for talking about it, but he really was a fighter, and he still had the arm. I'm a fool, but I'm going to go for the moon pool, or I'm going to die trying. Catfish hyperventilated, then dropped down into the water. It took only a moment to spot the moon pool. Not that far away, not impossible. I can make it. I can help Bud. He surged forward through the water, big sweeping strokes, caught the pipes, pulled himself along, but he wasn't making it. He was too tired. The cold was getting to him. The air was burning in his lungs like icy fire. He did not see the builder that floated in the water out beyond the reach of the lights, far enough away that she didn't damp the power in the rig. She was aware of the debate that had raged in the city after the humans tried to kill the probe. She knew that their role now was only to watch, but here was one of the humans, struggling to survive out in the water, almost naked, as fragile as the probe they had sent inside Deep Core. He was only following his friend, who seemed to be younger and stronger than he was. Wouldn't it be as great a crime to let this one die out here as it was for the one inside to try to kill our probe? Isn't letting them die a kind of murder too? So, she thickened the tendrils and reached out part of her own intelligence toward him. She slipped between the crease of his lips, down his throat, into his lungs. It wasn't hard for her to make the catalyst that broke the carbon dioxide in his lungs back into carbon and oxygen. She absorbed the excess carbon herself and carried it back along the tendrils. It wasn't much, really, not too much interference, just enough oxygen that he could rise up to the surface of the pool and breathe for himself. When he broke out into the gaseous space, she drew back her tendrils and retreated. She would be rebuked for this, probably. Her memories would probably be shameful ones when she brought them to the city, but she was alone, and she had made the decision she would certainly have made if Catfish had been a builder and not a man.